I sold your dream car to pay for my cruise. My wife's mother bragged as I lay in the hospital. 5 minutes later, the car dealer called. Ma'am, this sport car is worth $10 million. I have reported it to the police. They are on their way. My wife's mother didn't know the car she sold was. My name is Marcus Lane, and I'm going to tell you something that most people wouldn't understand. I've spent the better part of my adult life chasing a dream that fits in a two-car garage. Not some fancy mansion in the hills or a yacht docked in Miami, but a single automobile that most folks would walk right past without giving it a second glance. An original 1963 Aurelio V12 Spider. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Sounds like some fancy Italian nonsense, right? Well, you'd be half right about the Italian part. See, there were only 3 of these beauties ever made. 3. In the entire world. And somehow, through 18 years of blood, sweat, and more overtime hours than I care to count, I managed to get my hands on one. Not because I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, or because I hit the lottery. Hell no. I earned every single bolt, every piece of chrome, every leather stitch on those seats through pure determination and a mechanical engineering degree that actually meant something back when I got it. The whole thing started when I was browsing through some obscure car collector magazine during my lunch break at the shop. There it was, buried in the classified section like a hidden treasure. 1963 Aurelio V12 Spider frame. Needs complete restoration, serious inquiries only. The asking price was steep, but it wasn't the money that caught my attention. It was the location, some old collector in a tiny village outside of Rome. This guy, Giuseppe something or other, had apparently bought the car decades ago with dreams of fixing it up, but life got in the way like it always does. I remember calling Julia that night, trying to explain why I wanted to blow our vacation savings on what she called a pile of rusted metal. She didn't get it then, and honestly, I'm not sure she completely gets it now. But that's the thing about dreams. They don't always make sense to other people. They just make sense to you, deep down in your gut where logic doesn't really matter. The process of getting that frame shipped from Italy was like navigating a bureaucratic nightmare. Import fees, customs paperwork, shipping insurance, the whole 9 yards. But when that container truck pulled up to my house and they unloaded what was basically a skeleton of automotive history, I knew I'd made the right call. Julia stood in the driveway, arms crossed, probably wondering if she'd married a lunatic. But me? I was already seeing the finished product in my mind. 18 years. That's how long it took me to bring that car back to life. 18 years of hunting down original parts from junkyards in Detroit, specialty shops in Germany, and private collectors who guarded their stashes like dragons hoarding gold. 18 years of spending every weekend and most evenings in my garage, learning techniques that aren't taught in engineering school. 18 years of saying no to vacations, new furniture, and pretty much anything that wasn't absolutely necessary, so I could pour every extra dollar into my obsession. The engine alone took me 3 years to rebuild. A V12 isn't like the V8s you see in American muscle cars. This thing was a work of art. Each cylinder perfectly balanced, each component machined to tolerances that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. I had to learn Italian just to read the original service manuals. Yeah, you heard that right. I taught myself Italian for a car. Julia thought I'd completely lost it when she found me practicing pronunciation while adjusting valves. But here's the thing that nobody else seemed to understand. It wasn't just about the car. Every night I spent in that garage was like meditation. The smell of motor oil and metal polish, the sound of wrenches clicking against bolts, the satisfaction of seeing something broken become whole again. In a world where everything's disposable and nothing's built to last, I was creating something permanent. Something real. The finished product sits in my garage now, covered by a custom silver tarp that cost more than most people spend on a month of groceries. Julia knows it's valuable. I've mentioned the insurance payments often enough, but I don't think she truly grasps what we're talking about here. We're talking about automotive history. We're talking about one of 3 cars that represent the pinnacle of 1960s Italian engineering. We're talking about something that major collectors would kill for. But you know what? I'm not selling. Not ever. This car isn't just an investment or a trophy. It's proof that regular guys like me can achieve something extraordinary if we're willing to put in the work. Every time I pull back that tarp and see those perfect curves gleaming under the garage lights, I remember why I started this journey. It wasn't about impressing anyone or making money. It was about proving to myself that dreams are worth chasing, even when they take 18 years to catch. Especially when they take 18 years to catch. Now, let me tell you about my mother-in-law, Bernice. If you've ever met someone who could suck the air out of a room just by walking into it, then you know exactly what I'm dealing with. This woman is like a hurricane in high heels, loud, destructive, and somehow always manages to leave a mess that other people have to clean up. Julie is sweet as pie, always has been since the day I met her at that coffee shop near the university. But her mother? That's a whole different story, and not the kind you'd want to tell around the dinner table. Bernice has this way of looking at me like I'm something she scraped off the bottom of her shoe. See, in her world, a real man wears a three-piece suit to work, carries a briefcase, and takes his wife on fancy European vacations twice a year. A real man, according to Bernice, doesn't come home with grease under his fingernails or spend his evenings tinkering with engines in the garage. Julia deserves better. She's told me more times than I can count, usually loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The woman's got opinions about everything, and she's not shy about sharing them. My work, my hobbies, the way I dress, the beer I drink, even the way I mow the lawn. Nothing's off limits for Bernice's commentary. A real man would hire someone to do that, she'll say, watching me change the oil in Julia's Honda. A real man would take my daughter to Paris, not drag her to some dirty auto show. The irony is that Julia actually loves going to car shows with me. She gets excited about the vintage Mustangs and asks intelligent questions about engine modifications. But Bernice conveniently ignores that part. What really gets under my skin is how she moved in with us. It was supposed to be temporary, just a few months while she sorted out what she called temporary financial issues. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of having someone in my house who looks at me like I'm the help, who criticizes everything from my morning coffee routine to the way I stack dishes in the dishwasher. 2 years of biting my tongue when she makes snide comments about my little hobby in the garage. The garage. That's my sanctuary, the one place in the house where I can escape from Bernice's constant stream of negativity. I keep it locked, always have, even before she moved in. It's not that I don't trust Julia, but the Aurelio represents too much work, too much investment, too much of my soul to take any chances. Plus, insurance companies get nervous about unsecured classic cars, and I'm not about to give them any excuse to deny a claim. But lately, I've been noticing things. Little things that set off alarm bells in the back of my mind. The spare key to the garage, which I keep in a specific spot in my toolbox in the basement, has been moved. Not lost, not misplaced, moved. Someone's been handling it. And there's only one person in this house who would have the nerve to go snooping where she doesn't belong. Last week, I found footprints in the thin layer of dust near the workbench. Small footprints, about a size 7, which rules out Julia, she's a 9. The lock on the garage door has tiny scratches around the keyhole that weren't there before, the kind you get when someone's trying to work a key in the dark or in a hurry. And then there's the way Bernice has been asking casual questions about the car lately. "What kind of car is that old thing in the garage, Marcus?" she asked last Sunday while we were watching football. "Must be worth something if you spend so much time on it." I played it off, told her it was just a hobby project, nothing special. But the way her eyes lit up when I mentioned it was a classic Italian sports car made my stomach turn. This is a woman who sees dollar signs in everything, from the antique lamp Julia inherited from her grandmother to the vintage watch I got for my college graduation. Everything in Bernice's world has a price tag, and she's always calculating whether something's worth more in cash than it is sitting around collecting dust. The thing that really pisses me off is how she manipulates Julia. My wife's got a heart bigger than Texas, always looking for the good in people, always willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt. When Bernice first moved in, Julia actually defended her mother's criticism of me. "She's just worried about our future," Julia would say. "She wants to make sure we're financially secure." But what Julia doesn't understand is that her mother isn't worried about our security. She's worried about her own. I've done my homework on Bernice's temporary financial issues. Turns out she burned through her divorce settlement in less than 3 years, blowing money on luxury cruises, designer handbags, and get-rich-quick schemes that would make a Vegas con artist blush. She lost her condo because she spent the mortgage money on a vacation to Cabo. She maxed out every credit card she could get her hands on. then had the nerve to play the victim when the bills came due. But here's what really gets me. She acts like she's doing us a favor by living here. I'm helping Julia learn how to run a proper household, she'll announce, as if my wife hasn't been managing our home just fine for the past 8 years. A woman needs guidance from someone with experience. Experience at what? Bankrupting herself and mooching off family members? The worst part is watching how stressed Julia gets when her mother's around. My wife starts second-guessing herself, apologizing for things that don't need apologies, walking on eggshells in her own damn house. Last month, I caught Julia crying in the laundry room after Bernice had spent 20 minutes criticizing the way she folded towels. 20 minutes. Over towels. I've tried talking to Julia about setting boundaries, about maybe helping Bernice find her own place, but my wife just shuts down. She's my mother, Marcus. I can't just throw her out on the street. And I get that, I really do. Family's important, and I'd never ask Julia to choose between her mother and me. But living with someone who actively despises everything about your life? That's not sustainable. The garage key situation is the last straw. I've been keeping mental notes, documenting every time something seems off, every suspicious question, every strange look Bernice gives me when she thinks I'm not paying attention. Part of me wants to confront her directly, ask her what the hell she thinks she's doing snooping around my workspace. But the smarter part of me knows that would just create more drama, more stress for Julia, more ammunition for Bernice to use in her ongoing campaign to prove I'm not good enough for her daughter. So I've taken precautions. Changed the hiding spot for the key, installed a small security camera in the corner of the garage that's practically invisible unless you know where to look. I've also started keeping a detailed inventory of everything in there, every tool, every spare part, every piece of documentation related to the Aurelio. Call it paranoia if you want, but 18 years of work doesn't get protected by hoping for the best. What scares me most is that Bernice doesn't understand what she's dealing with. To her, it's just an old red car taking up space in the garage. She doesn't see the countless hours of research, the international phone calls to parts dealers, the nights I stayed up until 3 in the morning fine-tuning the carburetor. She doesn't understand that some things can't be measured in dollars and cents. But she's about to learn. Because if there's one thing I've figured out in my 43 years on this planet, it's that people like Bernice always overreach. They always push too hard, scheme too big, assume they're smarter than everyone else. And when they do, that's when they make mistakes. Big ones. I just hope Julia's ready for what's coming. Pain's got a funny way of putting things in perspective. 1 minute you're standing at your workbench, adjusting the timing on a customer's Chevy, and the next minute you're face down on the concrete floor with what feels like someone's taken a blowtorch to your insides. That's how it happened for me. No warning, no gradual buildup, just a sharp, stabbing sensation that dropped me like a sack of hammers right there in the middle of Rodriguez Auto Repair. They told me later it was an ulcer that had been eating away at my stomach lining for months, maybe longer. Internal bleeding, they called it, like that somehow made it sound less terrifying. By the time the paramedics got me to County General, I was already going into shock. Blood pressure dropping, pulse racing, the whole 9 yards. The ER doc took one look at me and started barking orders like we were in some medical drama on TV. The surgery took 4 hours. For hours that I don't remember, for hours where Julia sat in that uncomfortable waiting room chair, probably wondering if she was about to become a widow at 35. When I finally came to, 3 days later, the world felt like it was wrapped in cotton. Everything was fuzzy around the edges, sounds seemed to come from underwater, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on pennies for a week. Julia was there, of course, curled up in the corner chair like she'd been keeping vigil the entire time. Her hair was a mess. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on when they called her from the hospital, and I could see the worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Seeing her like that, knowing I'd put her through hell, made me feel worse than any physical pain the doctors could dish out. My phone was sitting on the bedside table, and the red notification light was blinking like a damn Christmas tree. 14 missed calls, most of them from Theo, my buddy who handles classic car insurance for a living. Theo's not the type to call once, let alone 14 times, unless something's seriously wrong. But every time I tried to reach for the phone, the room would start spinning, and I'd have to close my eyes until it stopped. That's when Bernice walked in, and I swear to God, the woman had the biggest shit-eating grin on her face I'd ever seen. Not the look of someone who's relieved that her son-in-law survived emergency surgery. Not the expression of someone who's been worried sick about a family member. No, this was the look of someone who'd just won the lottery and couldn't wait to start spending the money. "Oh good, you're awake," she said, but there wasn't an ounce of genuine concern in her voice. She was practically bouncing on her heels, like a kid on Christmas morning who couldn't wait to tear into her presents. "I have some news that's going to make you feel so much better about everything." I should have known right then. Should have seen it coming from the way she was dressed, her best outfit, the one she usually saved for special occasions. Should have caught on from the way she kept glancing at Julia, like she was waiting for an audience. But the painkillers had me fuzzy, and I was still trying to process the fact that I'd almost died on an auto shop floor. "I solved our little space problem," Bernice announced, like she was delivering the best news in the world. "While you were sleeping off your little medical adventure, I took care of that old junk car taking up space in the garage." Found. The silence in that hospital room was deafening. You could practically hear Bernice's world crashing down around her as the reality of what she'd done started to sink in. This wasn't some beat-up old Camaro she'd found rusting in a barn somewhere. This was automotive royalty, and she'd just tried to fence it like a stolen bicycle. "Sir, are you Marcus Lane?" Marlowe's voice came through the phone speaker again, cutting through the tension like a hot knife. "That's me," I managed to say, still fighting through the medication fog, but feeling more alert by the second. Adrenaline's got a funny way of clearing your head, even when you're hopped up on enough painkillers to drop a horse. "Mr. Lane, I have to tell you, when this vehicle was brought to our facility, we knew immediately that something was special. The woman who delivered it claimed it belonged to her, said it was just taking up space, and she needed it gone quickly. But the moment our lead appraiser laid eyes on it, we knew we were looking at something extraordinary." Bernice was trying to shrink into her chair, probably hoping the floor would just open up and swallow her whole. Julia looked like she was caught between wanting to strangle her mother and wanting to crawl under the hospital bed. Me? I was finally starting to feel like maybe this nightmare had a happy ending after all. "The paint job alone tipped us off," Marlowe continued. "That's not factory red. That's Rosso Corsa, the specific shade used by Italian racing teams in the 1960s. And the restoration work? Absolutely pristine. Whoever rebuilt this car knew exactly what they were doing. Every component is either original or period correct, and the attention to detail is museum quality. That part made me proud, even in the middle of this disaster. 18 years of weekends, 18 years of hunting down the right parts, 18 years of learning techniques that most modern mechanics don't even know exist. Hearing a professional acknowledge that work meant more to me than any price tag ever could. "But here's where things get interesting," Marlowe said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "When we ran the VIN number through our database, it came back flagged. This car is registered with the National Registry of Historic Automobiles as a protected asset. According to their records, it's one of only 3 remaining examples of its kind in the world." Bernice made a sound like a wounded animal. "3?" she whispered. "Only 3. That's correct, ma'am. The other 2 are in private collections. One in Switzerland, one in Japan. They're essentially priceless. But this one, Mr. Lane's car, has something the others don't. It has a complete restoration history, documented provenance, and most importantly, it's been registered under the Historic Asset Protection Act." Julia looked at me with confusion in her eyes. "Marcus, what is he talking about? What's the Historic Asset Protection Act?" Before I could answer, Marlowe jumped back in. "It's a federal program designed to protect culturally significant vehicles from theft, fraud, or illegal sale. When a car is registered under this act, it can only be sold or transferred with proper registry. Any attempt to sell it without these safeguards is considered grand theft under federal law." That's when Bernice really started to panic. "But I didn't know. How was I supposed to know it was some kind of national treasure or whatever? It looked like an old car." "Ma'am, ignorance of the law isn't a defense," Marlowe replied, his professional courtesy starting to strain. "Especially when the paperwork you provided appears to have been altered. We've examined the title documents you gave us, and there are clear signs of tampering. Whiteout correction fluid, mismatched signatures, and what appears to be a forged owner's signature." I closed my eyes and tried not to laugh. Even hopped up on painkillers and recovering from emergency surgery, I could have told her that whiteout on a car title is like waving a red flag at a bull. Any legitimate dealer would spot that from across the room. The vehicle is currently secured in our facility, Marlowe continued, and we've contacted both local police and federal authorities. Mr. Lane, I need to ask, do you want to press charges for theft and fraud? The question hung in the air like smoke from a backfiring engine. Julia was staring at me with a mixture of hope and terror, probably wondering if I was about to have her mother arrested on the spot. Bernice looked like she was about to throw up, which honestly would have been fitting considering she'd just tried to flush 18 years of my life down the drain for cruise money. Mr. Marlowe, I said finally, I need to understand something. The car, is it damaged? Did she hurt it in any way? Not at all, sir. In fact, it's been a privilege just having it in our showroom. We've had 3 collectors call already asking if it might be for sale, including one gentleman from Dubai who was willing to make an offer sight unseen. When I told him it wasn't available, he asked if he could at least come look at it. Apparently, cars like this don't come on the market very often. They don't come on the market ever, I corrected, because people like me don't sell them. We build them, we preserve them, and we pass them down to people who understand what they represent. Bernice finally found her voice again. Marcus, please. I made a mistake. I didn't understand. Surely we can work something out. Family should stick together, right? Julia, tell him. Tell him I was just trying to help. But Julia wasn't looking at her mother anymore. She was looking at me, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Respect. Maybe even a little bit of awe. How much? She asked quietly. How much is it worth? Marlowe cleared his throat before answering. Ma'am, cars like this don't really have a market value in the traditional sense. The last comparable vehicle that sold at auction went for $12.8 million. But that was 5 years ago, and the market for ultra-rare classics has only gotten stronger since then. Conservative estimate? 15 to 20 million. Maybe more to the right collector. The heart monitor next to my bed started beeping faster again, but this time it wasn't from stress. This time it was from pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Because Bernice had just learned what I'd known all along. Some things are worth more than money. And some people are too greedy to understand the difference. Here's what Bernice didn't know, what Julia didn't know, and what I'd been keeping to myself for the better part of 6 months. I saw this coming from a mile away. Not the medical emergency part, obviously, but the part where Bernice's greed would eventually get the better of her common sense. See, when you live with someone who looks at everything like it's a potential payday, you start taking precautions. Smart precautions. It all started last March when Theo called me up with what he thought was just a routine insurance question. Marcus, you need to hear about this new program they're rolling out for high-value classics, he said. It's called the Historic Asset Protection Act, and it's designed specifically for cars like yours. Think of it as Fort Knox for automobiles. Theo's been in the classic car insurance game for 15 years, and he's seen every scam, every theft, every heartbreak that can happen when rare vehicles change hands illegally. He told me stories that would make your blood run cold. Guys who spent decades restoring cars only to have them stolen by family members, business partners, even their own kids looking for drug money. The problem, he explained, is that once a car like yours hits the black market, it disappears forever. These thieves know how to move vehicles across state lines, forge paperwork, even ship them overseas where they'll never be recovered. The Historic Asset Protection Act was designed to prevent exactly that scenario. It's a federal program that creates a digital fingerprint for culturally significant vehicles, making them virtually impossible to sell illegally. The registration process is intense. They document everything from the VIN number to individual component serial numbers, take high-resolution photos of every detail, and most importantly, they require biometric verification from the registered owner for any transfer of ownership. Biometric verification? I asked Theo, what does that mean exactly? Fingerprints, retinal scans, the whole 9 yards, he replied. Plus, they install a GPS tracking chip somewhere in the vehicle that's invisible to casual inspection, but can be activated if the car goes missing. It's like having a personal security detail for your automobile. The idea appealed to me immediately, not just because of the security aspects, but because of the validation. Having the Aurelio officially recognized as a historically significant vehicle would be like getting a master's degree in automotive restoration. It would prove to the world that what I'd accomplished in my garage wasn't just a hobby. It was legitimate preservation of automotive history. The application process took 3 months and cost me $2,000, but it was worth every penny. They sent out a team of specialists who spent an entire day documenting every aspect of the car. They photographed serial numbers I didn't even know existed, tested paint samples to verify authenticity, and even took microscopic images of the leather grain on the seats. The lead inspector, a guy named Dr. Richards who had a PhD in automotive history, spent 20 minutes just admiring the engine bay. "Mr. Lane," he said finally, "in 30 years of doing this job, I've never seen restoration work of this caliber. This isn't just a car, it's a work of art. You should be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished here." The GPS chip installation was the part that really sealed the deal for me. They hid it so well that even I couldn't find it afterward, embedded somewhere in the rear chassis where it would be impossible to locate without specialized equipment. The chip was connected to a satellite network that could track the car's location anywhere in the world, and it could only be activated by federal authorities in cases of theft or fraud. But here's the part that really made me smile: the biometric verification system. Once the car was registered under my name and fingerprints, no one else could legally transfer ownership without my physical presence and consent. Not my wife, not my business partner, not even someone with a properly notarized power of attorney. The system required my actual fingerprints, verified against the database, plus a retinal scan and a verbal confirmation of my identity. Bernice could forge my signature all day long, but she couldn't forge my retinas. I never told Julia about the registration because I didn't want her to worry. She already thought I was obsessive about the car, and knowing that I'd spent $2,000 on high-tech security measures might have pushed her over the edge into thinking I'd completely lost my mind. Besides, it was better as a surprise, a little insurance policy that would only come into play if someone tried to pull exactly the kind of stunt that Bernice had just attempted. The irony was that Bernice actually did me a favor by taking the car to Marlowe's. If she'd tried to sell it to some shady dealer who didn't run VIN checks or ask questions about provenance, it might have taken weeks or even months to track down. But Marlowe's was exactly the kind of high-end operation that would immediately recognize what they were dealing with and follow proper procedures. Theo had warned me about this too. The good dealers will spot a protected vehicle immediately, he said. They have to run every VIN through the federal database before they can even consider making an offer. It's not just good business practice, it's the law. Any legitimate dealer who handles high-value classics is going to be plugged into the system. What Bernice didn't understand, what she couldn't have understood, was that stealing a car registered under the Historic Asset Protection Act wasn't like boosting someone's Honda from a parking lot. This was federal crime territory, the kind of thing that carried serious prison time and hefty fines. The law was written specifically to send a message that culturally significant vehicles were off-limits to thieves, grifters, and opportunistic family members looking for quick cash. Lying in that hospital bed, listening to Marlowe explain the situation to my panicked mother-in-law, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and total vindication. Every paranoid thought I'd had about Bernice, every suspicious glance, every moment of wondering if I was being too careful had just been proven absolutely correct. She'd walked right into a trap that I'd spent 6 months setting, and the beautiful part was that she'd done it entirely to herself. The next 30 minutes felt like the longest half hour of my life, but not for the reasons you might think. It wasn't the pain from the surgery or the stress of almost losing my car that had me on edge. It was the anticipation. I was lying in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines and pumped full of medications, watching Bernice slowly realize that her get-rich-quick scheme had just turned into a get-arrested-quick nightmare. And honestly, I was enjoying every second of it. She spent those 30 minutes trying to backpedal like her life depended on it, which, considering the circumstances, it probably did. "Marcus, you have to understand, I was just trying to help," she kept saying, her voice getting more desperate with each repetition. The garage was so cluttered, and Julia mentioned how you'd been stressed about money lately with the medical bills and everything. I thought I was doing you a favor. Julia, to her credit, wasn't buying it for a second. "Mom, you booked a Mediterranean cruise. How is spending Marcus's money on your vacation helping with our medical bills?" "Well, I was going to help with the bills when I got back," Bernice stammered. The cruise was already paid for, so I figured I might as well take it. Think of it as a small commission for handling the sale. A commission. This woman had just tried to steal a $20 million car, and she was calling it a commission. The sheer audacity would have been impressive if it wasn't so infuriating. That's when we heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets of them, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that you only hear from law enforcement. Julia tensed up immediately. She'd never been in trouble with the law, never even gotten a speeding ticket, so the sound of approaching cops probably felt like the end of the world to her. Bernice, on the other hand, went completely pale and started looking around the room like she was calculating escape routes. The first officer through the door was Detective Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd seen every scam in the book. Behind her was a younger guy in a suit who introduced himself as Agent Collins from the FBI's art crime team. Apparently, when you mess with federally protected cultural artifacts, the feds take it personally. Mrs. Bernice Hawkins? Detective Martinez asked, though it was pretty obvious who she was looking for. Bernice was the only person in the room who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor tiles. Yes, that's me, Bernice replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Gone was the confident woman who'd walked into my hospital room 30 minutes earlier, bragging about her world cruise and dismissing my life's work as junk. Now she looked like a deer caught in headlights, probably wondering how a simple theft had escalated into a federal case. Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions about a 1963 Aurelio V12 Spider that you attempted to sell earlier today, Detective Martinez said, pulling out a small notebook. According to the dealer, you claimed ownership of this vehicle and provided documentation to support that claim. Is that correct? I thought it was mine to sell, Bernice said, but even she didn't sound convinced by her own words. I mean, it was just sitting in our garage, taking up space. Marcus never drove it anywhere. How was I supposed to know it was worth anything? Agent Collins stepped forward, and I could see him studying Bernice with the kind of professional interest that cops develop after years of dealing with liars and con artists. Mrs. Hawkins, are you aware that the vehicle in question is registered as a protected cultural asset under federal law? Protected cultural asset? Bernice repeated, like she was hearing the words for the first time. It's just an old car. No, ma'am, it's not just an old car, Collins replied patiently. It's one of 3 remaining examples of its kind in the world, with a current estimated value exceeding $15 million. More importantly, it's registered to Mr. Marcus Lane here, not to you. The documentation you provided to Marlowe's Exotic Motors shows clear signs of forgery, including altered signatures and the use of correction fluid on official title documents. That's when Julia finally spoke up, and I could hear the hurt in her voice. Mom, you forged Marcus's signature? Bernice's face crumpled like she'd been caught stealing cookies from the church bake sale. I didn't forge anything. I cleaned up the paperwork a little, made it more presentable. The signature was smudged, so I fixed it. You fixed it with whiteout and wrote your own name over it, Detective Martinez said, consulting her notes. The dealer photographed all the documentation before processing the sale, and we've had handwriting experts examine the images. This isn't a case of cleaning up smudged ink, Mrs. Hawkins. This is deliberate document fraud. The room went quiet except for the steady beeping of my heart monitor and the sound of Bernice's increasingly panicked breathing. I could see her mind racing, trying to find some angle, some excuse that would get her out of this mess. But there wasn't one. She'd been caught red-handed with evidence that even a first-year law student could use to secure a conviction. Mrs. Hawkins, Agent Collins continued, I need to inform you that you're under arrest for grand theft auto, identity fraud, and violation of the Historic Asset Protection Act. You have the right to remain silent. And that's when Bernice completely lost it. You can't arrest me. This is insane. It's just a stupid car. She jumped up from her chair like she was going to make a run for it, which would have been hilarious considering we were on the 3rd floor of a hospital and there were 2 law enforcement officers blocking the door. Detective Martinez moved faster than I would have expected for someone her age, stepping around the hospital bed and placing a firm hand on Bernice's shoulder. Ma'am, I need you to calm down and put your hands behind your back. This is ridiculous. Bernice shrieked, loud enough that I was sure half the hospital could hear her. That's my daughter's house. I live there. I have every right to use anything in that garage. Actually, you don't, I said from my hospital bed, speaking for the first time since the officers had arrived. My voice was still weak from the medications, but it carried enough authority to cut through Bernice's hysteria. The garage is on my property, the car is registered in my name, and you have no legal claim to either one. The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that seemed to echo in the small hospital room. Bernice tried to struggle, but Detective Martinez had obviously done this before, and within seconds, she had my mother-in-law secured and relatively calm. Julia, do something, Bernice pleaded as the officers prepared to lead her away. Tell them I was confused. Tell them I didn't mean any harm. But Julia just sat there, staring at her mother like she was seeing her for the first time. Mom, you tried to steal Marcus's car to pay for a cruise. How am I supposed to defend that? It was supposed to be a surprise, Bernice said desperately as Detective Martinez guided her toward the door. I was going to tell you both when I got back. I thought you'd be proud of me for finally taking charge of my life. Agent Collins handed me a business card before following the others out. Mr. Lane, we'll need a formal statement from you once you're feeling better. The vehicle is secure at Marlowe's facility, and we'll coordinate with them to return it to you as soon as possible. As the door closed behind them, the sudden silence in the room was almost overwhelming. Julia and I sat there for a long moment, listening to the sound of Bernice's voice echoing down the hallway as she continued protesting her innocence to anyone who would listen. I'm sorry, Julia said finally, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I should have seen this coming. I should have stopped her. But I wasn't angry at Julia. How could I be? She'd been manipulated by her own mother, someone she'd trusted her entire life. It's not your fault, I told her, reaching out to take her hand. You couldn't have known she'd go this far. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been planning for this moment for months. Every precaution I'd taken, every security measure I'd implemented, had been leading up to this exact scenario. Bernice had walked into a trap that I'd spent half a year setting, and she'd done it with the kind of arrogant confidence that only comes from years of getting away with manipulating people. But her luck had finally run out. Getting discharged from County General 3 days later felt like being released from prison, except in reverse. Instead of freedom, I was walking back into a world where I'd have to deal with the aftermath of Bernice's spectacular stupidity. The doctors loaded me up with enough painkillers to stock a pharmacy and gave me a list of restrictions longer than a grocery receipt, but all I wanted was to see my car and make sure it was really okay. Julia drove me straight to Marlowe's, even though she kept insisting I should go home and rest. The car's not going anywhere, Marcus, she said for the third time as we pulled into the dealership parking lot. It's been sitting in their showroom for almost a week. Another few hours won't make a difference, but it would make a difference to me. Until I could run my hands over that paint job and hear the engine purr, I wouldn't really believe that 18 years of work hadn't been destroyed by one greedy woman's vacation Fanta. The human mind's got a funny way of creating worst-case scenarios when you're not sure about something, and I'd spent the past few days imagining everything from scratched paint to stripped interior. James Marlowe was waiting for us when we walked in, a tall guy in his 50s with the kind of genuine smile that you don't often see in the car business. He looked like he actually gave a damn about the vehicles he sold, which probably explained why his dealership had such a solid reputation among collectors. Mr. Lane, it's an honor to finally meet you, he said, extending his hand for a shake that was firm but careful. Probably noticed I was still moving like someone recovering from surgery. I have to tell you, having your Aurelio in our showroom has been the highlight of my month. We've had collectors calling from all over the world just asking if they could come look at it. Have you now? I replied, trying to keep the pride out of my voice and failing miserably. It's one thing to know you've built something special, but it's another thing entirely to have professionals in the industry confirm it. Follow me, Marlowe said, leading us toward the back of the showroom. I've got it positioned where it catches the afternoon light just right. Makes that Rosso Corsa paint look like liquid fire. And there she was, sitting under professional-grade spotlights like a piece of sculpture in a museum. Even after everything that had happened, even knowing she was safe, seeing the Aurelio in that pristine showroom took my breath away. The red paint seemed to glow under those lights, every curve and line exactly as I'd envisioned it during all those late nights in my garage. She looked like she belonged there, surrounded by other automotive legends, but she also looked ready to come home. Jesus, I whispered, running my hand along the hood. The metal was cool and smooth, not a scratch or ding anywhere that I could see. She's perfect. More than perfect, Marlowe said, genuine admiration in his voice. I've been in this business for 25 years, and I've never seen restoration work of this caliber. Every component is either original or period correct. The paint job is flawless, and the attention to detail is absolutely stunning. You should be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished here. Julia walked around the car slowly, like she was seeing it for the first time. Which, in a way, she was. She'd seen it in our garage plenty of times, but under those harsh fluorescent lights and covered with a tarp, it had just looked like an old red car taking up space. Here, displayed like the work of art it really was, she was finally understanding what I'd been trying to tell her for years. Marcus, she said quietly, I had no idea. I mean, I knew it was important to you. But this is incredible. Marlowe nodded in agreement. Your husband is a master craftsman, Mrs. Lane. The engine alone is a work of art. I had our head mechanic take a look under the hood, and he said it's the most perfectly rebuilt V12 he's ever seen. Factory specifications, period-correct components, and tuned to absolute perfection. That's when the bell above the front door chimed, and I turned to see Theo walking in with a bottle of bourbon in one hand and the biggest grin I'd seen from him in years. My buddy looked like he'd just won the lottery, which, considering how the insurance claim was going to work out, wasn't far from the truth. Marcus Lane, you magnificent bastard, he said, setting the bourbon down on Marlowe's desk and pulling me into a careful hug that avoided my surgical incisions. Do you have any idea how much paperwork you just saved me? When stolen classics disappear into the black market, the insurance investigations can drag on for years. But this is the cleanest recovery I've ever handled. Clean's one way to put it, I replied. Bernice made it pretty easy for everyone involved. Speaking of which, Theo said, pulling out his phone, you're not going to believe what I found out about your mother-in-law's financial situation. Remember how she claimed she was having temporary financial difficulties? Julia winced. What did you find? Turns out she's been living on credit for the past 3 years, Theo continued. Maxed out 17 different credit cards, took out payday loans, even borrowed against her life insurance policy. The woman owes over $200,000 to various creditors. That cruise she booked? She put it on a credit card that was already over its limit. I shook my head in disbelief. So she wasn't just stealing my car. She was stealing it to pay for a vacation she couldn't afford with money she didn't have. Gets better, Theo said. I talked to the prosecutor handling her case. Apparently, this isn't her first time pulling something like this. She's got a history of borrowing things from family members and friends, then claiming it was all a misunderstanding when she got caught. The difference is, those were smaller items, jewelry, electronics, stuff worth a few hundred or maybe a few $1,000s. This time she aimed too high and picked the wrong target. Marlowe was listening to this conversation with the fascination of someone who'd been in the car business long enough to have heard every story imaginable. You know what really gets me? He said. If she'd just done 5 minutes of research, she would have known exactly what she was dealing with. The VIN number on that car isn't hidden. It's right there on the dashboard. A simple internet search would have told her she was looking at automotive history. But that would have required her to think beyond her own immediate gratification. Julia said bitterly, my mother's never been good at long-term planning. Everything's always been about what she wants right now. Consequences be damned. I could hear the pain in Julia's voice, and it made me angrier at Bernice than I'd been even when I first found out what she'd done. It's one thing to steal from me. I'm a grown man who can handle betrayal and disappointment. But watching my wife struggle with the realization that her own mother was willing to destroy our lives for cruise money, that was unforgivable. You want to know the really crazy part? I said, looking at all 3 of them. She never even asked what it was worth. Never showed the slightest curiosity about why I spent so much time working on it. If she'd asked, if she'd shown even a little bit of genuine interest, I would have been happy to explain the whole history of the car, what made it special, why it mattered so much to me. Would you have told her about the federal registration? Theo asked with a knowing grin. Hell no, I replied, and we all laughed despite everything that had happened. Some things are better as surprises. Marlowe walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Speaking of surprises, Mr. Lane, I have some good news. The publicity from this case has generated a lot of interest in your car. I've had 3 different museums ask about borrowing it for exhibitions, and there's a documentary filmmaker who wants to interview you about the restoration process. Museums? Julia asked, looking at me with something that might have been awe. The Automotive Heritage Foundation in Detroit, the Peterson Museum in Los Angeles, and the Smithsonian, Marlowe replied. Apparently, your husband's work is considered significant enough to warrant preservation and public display. I stood there, looking at my car under those museum-quality lights, surrounded by people who finally understood what I'd been trying to accomplish all these years. It had taken Bernice's greed and stupidity to make it happen, but sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about how it delivers justice. That night, after we'd brought the Aurelio home, and I'd spent an hour just sitting in the garage staring at it like I was afraid it might disappear again, Julia finally broke down. I found her in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with tears streaming down her face and a wadded-up tissue in her hands that looked like it had seen better days. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she said without looking up at me. "I'm so goddamn sorry about everything. About my mother, about not seeing what she was capable of, about enabling her for so long that she thought she could get away with something like this." I sat down next to her, careful not to aggravate my surgical incisions, and put my arm around her shoulders. She felt small and fragile, like she was carrying the weight of her mother's sins on her own conscience. "Julia, look at me," I said gently. "None of this is your fault. You couldn't have known she'd go this far." "But I should have," she replied, finally meeting my eyes. "All the signs were there, Marcus. The way she looked at your car, the questions she'd been asking, the way she'd been going through our financial paperwork when she thought we weren't watching. I saw all of it, and I told myself it was just her being nosy. I convinced myself that blood meant something, that family loyalty was more important than protecting what we'd built together." The pain in her voice was worse than any physical discomfort I'd experienced in that hospital. This was my wife, the woman I'd fallen in love with at a coffee shop near the university 8 years ago, the woman who'd supported my obsession with rebuilding cars even when she didn't fully understand it. Seeing her blame herself for her mother's betrayal was like watching someone punch themselves in the face over and over again. "Your mother manipulated you," I said firmly. "That's what manipulative people do. They make you feel guilty for not trusting them, even when your instincts are telling you something's wrong. She's had 35 years of practice turning you into her personal guilt machine, and you're not responsible for falling for it." Julia leaned against my shoulder, and I could feel her body shaking with suppressed sobs. "She tried to steal your life's work, Marcus. 18 years of your passion, your skill, your dreams. She was going to trade it all for a fucking cruise. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who sees everything and everyone as a means to an end," I replied. "The kind of person who's never built anything herself, so she doesn't understand what it means to create something with your own hands." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sound of traffic outside our bedroom window and the occasional creak of the house settling around us. I could tell Julia was working through something in her head, probably trying to reconcile the image of the mother she'd grown up loving with the reality of the woman who'd tried to rob us blind. "You know what really gets me?" she said eventually. "It's not just that she tried to steal the car. It's that she was so dismissive of what it meant to you. All those years of watching you work in the garage, seeing how happy it made you, how proud you were of every little improvement, and she still saw it as junk. She saw your passion as worthless. That hit me harder than I'd expected it to." Julia was right. The theft itself was bad enough, but the casual dismissal of something that represented the best part of who I was? That cut deeper than any financial loss could have. "She called it junk," I said, remembering that moment in the hospital room when Bernice had announced her brilliant plan. "Standing right there in front of you. She called 18 years of my work junk." "And that's when I knew," Julia replied, sitting up straighter and wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's the moment I realized that my mother doesn't just disrespect you. She doesn't understand the concept of respect at all. She doesn't respect hard work. She doesn't respect other people's dreams. And she sure as hell doesn't respect the idea that some things can't be measured in dollar signs." I was about to respond when Julia's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and immediately frowned. "It's from her," she said quietly. "From jail." "What's it say?" Julia read the message aloud, her voice getting flatter with each word. Julia, sweetie, I hope you're not too upset about this little misunderstanding. I'm sure once Marcus has time to think about it, he'll realize I was just trying to help. Maybe you could talk to him about dropping the charges? I can't afford a lawyer, and this whole thing is just getting blown out of proportion. Love you, Mom. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see the wheels turning in Julia's head as she processed the fact that her mother, even sitting in a jail cell facing federal charges, still couldn't admit what she'd actually done. Still couldn't acknowledge that attempting to steal a $20 million car wasn't a little misunderstanding or a misguided attempt to help. Little misunderstanding, Julia repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. She tried to steal a car worth more than most people's houses, and she's calling it a little misunderstanding. And she wants you to convince me to drop the charges, I added. Even now, even after everything that's happened, she's still trying to manipulate you into fixing her problems for her. Julia stared at her phone for a long moment, then deliberately turned it off and set it on the nightstand. I'm done, she said quietly. I'm done making excuses for her. I'm done feeling guilty about her choices, and I'm done letting her treat our family like her personal ATM. I'd been waiting years to hear those words from my wife. Not because I wanted to drive a wedge between Julia and her mother, but because I could see how much damage Bernice's constant manipulation was doing to the woman I loved. Watching Julia constantly second-guess herself, constantly worry about whether she was being a good enough daughter, constantly sacrifice her own peace of mind to keep her mother happy, it had been killing me slowly. You sure about that? I asked. Because once you cut contact with her, there's probably no going back. People like Bernice don't forgive being held accountable for their actions. Good. Julia replied with more conviction than I'd heard from her in months. Maybe it's time I stopped caring about whether she forgives me and started caring about whether I can forgive myself for enabling her for so long. We sat there holding hands while Julia worked through the full implications of what she'd just decided. Cutting off contact with a parent, even a manipulative one, isn't something you do lightly. It means accepting that the relationship you've been hoping for, the mother you've been wishing she could be, is never going to materialize. It means grieving the loss of something that never really existed in the first place. Can I ask you something? Julia said after a few minutes. Why didn't you ever tell me how much the car was actually worth? I mean, I knew it was valuable, but $20 million? That's not something you keep secret from your wife. It was a fair question, and one I'd been expecting ever since Marlo had dropped that number in the hospital room. Because I wanted someone who loved me even when I had nothing, I said honestly. When we met, I was just a guy with a mechanical engineering degree and a half-restored car frame in his garage. You fell in love with that guy, not with the guy who owned a $20 million automobile. Julia squeezed my hand tighter. You think I would have treated you differently if I'd known? Not consciously, I replied. But money changes things, even when you don't want it to. People start seeing you as a bank account instead of a person. They start wondering what you can do for them instead of just enjoying who you are. I've seen it happen to other collectors in the classic car community. Suddenly, everyone's their best friend. Everyone's got investment opportunities. Everyone needs a loan. So you were protecting us, she said, understanding dawning in her voice. From gold diggers and opportunists. And from family members who might see a car worth $20 million as their ticket to a better life, I added pointedly. Julia actually laughed at that, though there wasn't much humor in it. Well, that plan worked out perfectly, didn't it? My mother saw it as her ticket to a Mediterranean cruise. Your mother saw it as an old car taking up space. I corrected. If she'd known what it was really worth, she probably would have tried to be smarter about stealing it. Maybe found a black market dealer, maybe tried to ship it overseas before anyone noticed it was missing. The fact that she didn't know its value is probably what saved it. Ironic, Julia murmured. Her greed saved your car. Her ignorance saved my car, I clarified. Her greed almost destroyed our family. Julia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger than it had been all evening. I'm going to therapy, she announced. Individual therapy to work through all the damage she's done to my ability to trust my own judgment, and couples therapy with you to make sure we can rebuild what she tried to tear down. That surprised me, but it was a good kind of surprise. You think we need couples therapy? I think I need to learn how to be a wife who puts her husband first instead of constantly worrying about managing her mother's feelings, Julia replied. I think I need to understand how to be part of a team instead of trying to keep everyone happy all the time. And I think you deserve to have a partner who recognizes the difference between family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior. I pulled her closer, careful not to strain my surgical incisions, and kissed the top of her head. I love you, Julia. Not the version of you that keeps everyone happy, not the version that manages other people's problems. I love the woman who's strong enough to make hard decisions and smart enough to recognize when someone's taking advantage of her kindness. Even if it took me 8 years to figure out that my mother was a manipulative thief. Especially because it took you 8 years, I replied. Easy decisions don't require courage. Anyone can cut off someone who's obviously toxic. It takes real strength to admit that someone you love is hurting you and choose your own well-being over their comfort. Julia turned off her phone completely and put it in the drawer of her nightstand. She's going to keep trying to contact me, she said. Probably through other family members, maybe through friends. She's not going to accept that I'm done with her games. Then we'll deal with it together, I promised. No more going it alone. No more trying to manage her without backup. From now on, it's you and me against whatever she tries to pull. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Julia smiled like she meant it. 2 months later, just when life was starting to feel normal again, I got a phone call that changed everything. I was in my garage, doing some routine maintenance on a customer's Mustang, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail. Too many telemarketers and scam artists these days. But something made me wipe the grease off my hands and answer it. Mr. Lane? This is Patricia Hoffman from the Global Heritage Auto Show in Monaco. I hope I'm catching you at a good time. Monaco, the Global Heritage Auto Show. Every serious collector and automotive enthusiast in the world knew about that event. It was like the Olympics of classic cars, the kind of show that most PEO. You've got my attention, I said, setting down my wrench and giving the conversation my full focus. We've been following the story of your 1963 Aurelio V12 Spider, she continued, her voice carrying the kind of professional enthusiasm that suggested she genuinely loved what she did. The authentication process, the federal registration, the recent incident with the attempted theft. It's created quite a buzz in the collector community. I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or embarrassed. Having my family drama become industry gossip wasn't exactly what I'd had in mind when I'd registered the car as a protected asset. We'd like to invite you to display your Aurelio as our featured restoration at this year's show, she continued. The theme is Lost Masterpieces Found, and your car represents exactly the kind of passion project that we want to celebrate. We're talking about a full spotlight presentation, professional photography, and media interviews with major automotive publications. I had to sit down on my work stool. The Global Heritage Auto Show was invitation only, the kind of event where billionaires came to bid on cars that most museums would kill to own. Having the Aurelio featured there would be like getting a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, the ultimate validation that 18 years of work had been worth something. What exactly would this involve? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Transportation to Monaco, 5-star accommodations for you and your wife, and a featured spot on the main exhibition floor, she replied. Plus, we'd like to document your restoration process for our annual publication. Our readers are fascinated by craftsmen who can bring automotive history back to life. 3 weeks later, Theo and I were standing on the exhibition floor of the Monte Carlo Convention Center, watching crews position the Aurelio under professional lighting that made the Rosso Corsa paint look like liquid fire. The whole scene felt surreal. My garage project, the car I'd spent countless evenings working on in my suburban driveway, was now sharing space with Ferraris that had raced at Le Mans and Porsches that had dominated European rally circuits. You realize this is insane, right? Theo said, snapping photos with his phone like a tourist at the Louvre. 2 months ago, your mother-in-law tried to sell this thing for cruise money. Now it's the star of the most prestigious auto show in the world. Don't remind me, I replied, but I was grinning as I said it. The whole Bernice situation had become something of a running joke in the classic car community. The story of the woman who tried to steal a $20 million automobile to pay for a vacation had spread through collector circles like wildfire. The opening night gala was like something out of a movie. Men in $1,000 suits and women dripping in jewelry walked around admiring cars that cost more than most people's houses, while waiters circulated with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than I used to make in a week. Julia, dressed in a black cocktail dress that made her look like she belonged in this world, stayed close to my side as we navigated conversations with collectors, journalists, and automotive historians. That's the man who almost lost it all to his mother-in-law. I heard someone whisper as we walked past a group of well-dressed Europeans. Word traveled fast in the collector community, and apparently my family drama had become part of the Aurelio's mystique. But you know what? I didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them turn Bernice's stupidity into cocktail party conversation. The car was here, it was safe, and it was being celebrated by people who understood what it represented. The highlight of the evening came when a reporter from Classic Car magazine approached me for an interview. "Mr. Lane, can you tell us what it felt like to almost lose your life's work to a family member?" "Honestly," I replied, looking over at the Aurelio gleaming under those professional lights. "It reminded me why I built her in the first place. Not for the money, not for the recognition, but for the pure satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. The fact that she's worth $20 million is just a bonus. The real value is in the journey." "And what advice would you give to other enthusiasts who are working on their own restoration projects?" I thought about that for a moment, remembering all those late nights in the garage, all the frustration and setbacks and small victories that had led to this moment. "Never let anyone else define what your dream is worth," I said finally. "There will always be people who don't understand why you'd spend years working on something that they see as just an old car. But they're not building it, you are. They're not putting their heart and soul into every bolt and wire. You are. And when it's finished, when you're standing next to something you created with your own hands, their opinions won't matter anymore." The reporter scribbled notes while I talked, occasionally looking up to study the Aurelio, like she was trying to understand how 18 years of passion could be distilled into chrome and steel and perfectly tuned machinery. Later that evening, as the crowds thinned out and the waiters began clearing champagne glasses, Theo and I stood alone with the car for a few minutes. The convention center was quieter now, just the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of cleanup crews working in other sections of the building. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Theo said, running his hand along the Aurelio's fender. "If Bernice had succeeded, if she'd managed to sell this thing to some black market dealer, we'd probably never have seen it again. It would have disappeared into some private collection in Asia or the Middle East, and all this," he gestured at the exhibition space around us, "would never have happened." "Her greed saved my car," I replied, echoing something Julia had said months earlier. Her ignorance and her impatience and her complete inability to do 5 minutes of research before committing a felony. It all worked in my favor in the end. "Think she knows where the car is right now?" I laughed at that. "She's probably still sitting in that halfway house, telling anyone who'll listen about how she was trying to help her family by selling worthless junk. The irony is that she'll never understand what she almost destroyed." As we stood there in that world-class exhibition space, surrounded by automotive history and the kind of wealth that most people only see in movies, I realized something important. The Aurelio wasn't just my car anymore. It was a symbol of what happens when passion meets persistence, when someone refuses to let other people's limitations define their dreams. And Bernice, sitting in her court-mandated community service program back home, would never understand that no matter how hard she tried. 6 months after Monaco, I was standing in my brand-new shop, watching a 17-year-old kid named Danny carefully sand primer off a 1967 Camaro fender, and thinking about how funny life can be sometimes. The kid had steady hands and genuine curiosity about the work, asking smart questions about metal prep and paint chemistry. Reminded me of myself at that age, except he had something I never had, a mentor who was willing to share what he'd learned the hard way. The conviction came down 3 weeks after the auto show. Bernice pled guilty to attempted grand theft auto and document fraud, probably on the advice of whatever public defender drew the short straw of representing her. The judge wasn't impressed with her sob story about financial difficulties and family misunderstandings. Turns out federal judges don't have much sympathy for people who try to steal $20 million cars to pay for Mediterranean cruises. She got 18 months of community service, 5 years probation, and a lifetime ban on contacting Julia or me without court permission. The restitution hearing was almost comical. How do you calculate damages for attempting to steal something that's literally priceless? The prosecutor settled for having her pay the costs of the federal investigation, which came out to about 15 grand she definitely didn't have. But here's the thing that really gets me. She never apologized. Not once. Not even when the judge asked her directly if she understood the impact of her actions on her family. She stood there in her Orange County jail jumpsuit and maintained that she was just trying to help, that we were overreacting, that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion by a legal system that didn't understand family dynamics. Julia didn't attend the sentencing hearing. She'd made her decision back in that hospital room, and watching her mother get dragged off to serve community service wasn't going to change anything. She made her choices. Julia told me the night before. Now she gets to live with the consequences. I'm done carrying her emotional baggage for her. The insurance payout from Theo's company covered all our medical bills, and then some. But the real windfall came from an unexpected source. 3 different collectors contacted me after Monaco, wanting to commission restoration work on their own projects. Not just basic mechanical work, but complete ground-up rebuilds of cars they'd been storing in climate-controlled warehouses for decades. That's how Lane Heritage Motors got started. Julia came up with the name. She said it sounded more professional than Marcus's Garage and less pretentious than some of the boutique restoration shops we'd researched. We found a perfect space in an old industrial building, complete with hydraulic lifts, proper ventilation, and enough room for me to work on 6 cars simultaneously. The business plan was simple. Take on high-end restoration projects for collectors who wanted museum-quality work, and use the profits to fund a teaching program for kids who wanted to learn traditional craftsmanship. Danny was my first student, a high school dropout, whose probation officer thought working with his hands might keep him out of trouble. Turned out the kid had natural talent and a hunger to learn that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this work in the first place. "Mr. Lane," Danny said, looking up from the fender he'd been working on. "This primer's coming off clean, but there's some rust underneath. Should I sand through it or treat it chemically? What do you think?" I asked, walking over to examine his work. This was something I'd learned from my own mistakes. Asking questions instead of just giving answers helped kids develop their own problem-solving skills. Danny studied the metal for a moment, running his fingers over the affected area. "Rust this light. I think sanding will get it clean without weakening the metal. Chemical treatment might be overkill." "Good call," I said, and watched his face light up with the kind of pride that comes from making the right decision independently. "Take it down to bare metal, and we'll treat it with phosphoric acid before we prime it again." The Aurelio still sits in my personal garage at home, under the same silver tarp it wore for all those years before Bernice's spectacular stupidity. But now it gets driven regularly. Julia and I take it out for weekend cruises along the coast, and I've loaned it to 3 different museums for temporary exhibitions. The car was meant to be seen, meant to be appreciated, meant to remind people that true craftsmanship still exists in a world that increasingly values convenience over quality. Every time I fire up that V12 and listen to it settle into its perfect idle, I think about what Bernice never understood. She saw an old red car taking up space in a garage. I saw 18 years of passion, persistence, and the kind of pride that comes from creating something beautiful with your own hands. The funny thing is, she actually did me a favor. Her attempt to steal my life's work forced me to confront some hard truths about family, loyalty, and the difference between enabling someone and actually helping them. It pushed Julia to set boundaries she should have established years earlier. And it gave me the confidence to turn my obsession into a business that's already changing lives. Mine, Julia's, and kids like Danny who are hungry for the chance to learn something real. Some nights, when I'm closing up the shop and Danny's heading home with primer under his fingernails and satisfaction on his face, I remember what I told that reporter in Monaco. Never let anyone decide what your dream is worth. Bernice thought my dream was worth whatever she could get for it at a car dealership. But she was wrong about that, just like she was wrong about everything else. Some things, the best things, can't be measured in dollars and cents. They can only be measured in the pride of a job well done and the satisfaction of passing that knowledge on to the next generation.